So today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea, how we can start redesigning our organizations. Not for, mindless compliance, but for something that's way more valuable in the chaotic world we live in, actual human judgment.
So what is the fundamental problem that so many modern organizations are facing? Well, it's pretty simple actually. Their core systems, the very processes that make them run, were all designed for a stable, predictable world. A world that, let's be honest, just doesn't exist anymore.
You see, these systems are built on some pretty shaky, outdated assumptions. They kind of assume that environments are predictable, that you can perfectly define and spec out all the work ahead of time, and that if people just follow the rules, if they just comply, then success is basically guaranteed. But we all know, reality is so much messier than that.
And what happens when you have these outdated assumptions? Well, our systems become brittle. Yeah, that's the word. They're designed for total control, but they just shatter the second they run into the kind of complexity that is now, well, the norm for all of us.
So where do we even begin to find a new path forward? The answer, and this is pretty cool, it comes from a really unlikely pairing, philosophy and computer science. We're going to look at two thinkers who, for all their differences, were obsessed with the exact same core question.
And here they are. These are our guides for this little journey. Douglas Hofstadter, the cognitive scientist famous for his mind-bending book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and Alfred North Whitehead, a hugely influential philosopher. I know, right? An unlikely pair. But trust me, their ideas are exactly what we need right now.
Okay, so from Hofstadter, we get this amazing idea of emergence. He basically argued that real intelligence doesn't come from some top-down instruction manual. Nope, it emerges from the bottom up, from all the little interactions between different parts of a system. Just think about a flock of birds, right? There's no leader shouting orders, but this beautiful, coherent pattern just emerges from a few simple rules of interaction.
And then there's Whitehead. Man, he takes this even further. He challenges our most basic assumption that the world is made up of stable, static things. He says, no, that's all wrong. Reality is a process. It's just a constant flow of events unfolding. Everything is always becoming. It's like a river, The shape might look stable for a second, but the water itself is always changing. So change isn't some weird exception, it's the fundamental rule of the game.
All right, so if reality is just this constant process, what on earth does that mean for our systems? Well, it means we need a pretty radical shift. We have to move away from trying to enforce behavior and move towards observing and adapting to reality as it happens.
Let's break down the old way, what the source material here calls the enforcement model. And I bet this is going to sound super familiar. First, a few experts get together and define the one right way to do something. Then, everybody else is trained to follow that sequence exactly. Success? Oh, that's measured by how well you comply. And if you deviate at all, that's an error. It gets escalated and corrected. Sound familiar?
But here's the crucial point. This model, it's a trap. See, in a simple, predictable world, yeah, maybe enforcement gets you reliability. But in our complex world, trying to enforce a rigid process only creates one thing: fragility. It stops the system from learning and adapting right at the moment it needs to the most.
This slide right here, this is the whole paradigm shift we need. We have to stop asking, how do we make people follow the process? That's a question about control. The new and much better question is, how do our processes observe and adapt? Now that is a question about sensing, about learning, about resilience.
So what does a system that's actually designed for observation look like? Well, for one, feedback has to be immediate. And rules, they're there to guide you, not to be dictators. Humans aren't just mindless executors. They're interpreters. And this one is so important. Exceptions are not failures to be punished. They are vital pieces of information, signals that the system needs to learn something new.
But hold on, what about AI? Doesn't automation just solve all this for us? Well, not exactly. In fact, the rise of AI actually makes this shift toward human judgment even more critical. And here's the insight you really need to get. AI is unbelievably powerful at accelerating outputs. It can generate code, it can write text, it can spit out recommendations instantly. But what it does not and cannot do is supply judgment. What it does do is shine a giant spotlight on where judgment is missing in the first place.
So, in a world that's just flooded with AI-generated stuff, the most important human skill becomes discernment. We constantly have to ask ourselves these three questions about pretty much anything an AI gives us. Okay, when should I trust this? When should I push back and challenge it? And when is the right move to just ignore it completely.
So all of this brings us to our final and most actionable question. How do we actually build organizations that are good at this? How do we start designing for discernment, especially when the pressure is on and things are moving fast?
Well, it really all comes down to these 4 key shifts. We have to move from thinking about static workflows to designing living systems. We need to go from valuing rule following to cultivating judgment holding, from obsessing over compliance metrics to looking for learning signals, and finally, from seeing automation as a replacement for people to using it as an amplification of their intelligence.
So this is the final thought I really want to leave you with. In a world of accelerating complexity, the ultimate competitive advantage is the ability to decide well without having all the answers. That capacity for judgment, it cannot be automated. But, and this is the hopeful part, it can be designed for. The only question left is, what will you start designing?